they were a credible organization. I didn't want to come out publicly in support of drug policy reform, and then something horrendous happens, like the executive board of LEAP gets arrested for drug trafficking or something. That would not be good for my career. So I followed them for about a year. I read all their press releases, kept a close eye on what their members did, and eventually I was just quite impressed with them as a group, and so I ended up joining.
Did you talk to any of your fellow officers or did others have the same frustrations?
Well, I think a lot of officers have the same frustrations. We might disagree in terms of what we should do about it, right? But officers are just are regular people too, in a sense. Some of them, for example, like the idea of decriminalizing marijuana, of being able to give people a ticket. Some of them like the idea of legalizing it, right? In fact, a lot of them do, in my opinion. And it depends how you phrase it too. If you say to a police officer, sometimes, I think heroin should be legal, they'll say that you're crazy. But then if you phrase it a slightly different way and you say, I think heroin should be prescribed to addicts on a maintenance basis in a controlled medical setting, like they do in Europe, then they're more open to the idea, right? Well, that's a form of legalization, right? So, in my opinion, the average level of drug policy literacy, I guess, of most police officers is quite low. A lot of officers, for various reasons, just aren't interested in the subject, or have only learned about it from one perspective, or just aren't interested necessarily in taking the time to really dig into it, right? And to go to conferences or to talk to people about it. So there's a real educational process that needs to take place, I think, with law enforcement. And we're probably, in some respects, how the law enforcement community in North America looks at drug addicts is probably similar to how the law enforcement community, say 40 years ago, looked at gay people, right? Or 80 years ago looked at black people, or something like that, right? That's kind of how I look at it. So it's a long, slow road to social change, and quite often law enforcement is kind of at the tail end of that movement, right? So, there's going to be some bumps in the road, and it will be gradual, but I think it's coming. It's just a slow process. So.
Are others coming to you, sir? Are other officers around you coming to you more frequently asking about your involvement? Because clearly everyone you work with must know you're involved in this. So do they come to you on the side and say, listen, I have some questions,
I've had some good experiences that way, but generally, I try not to sell it at work, right? So I do have some officers will come up to me and ask me, for example. Sometimes the topic will come up. There was one officer at my department who actually lent me a book about drug policy, which I thought was really, I was kind of excited about that, right? But I really want to be respectful of my department and separate the two issues. I don't want to be recruiting in my own backyard necessarily. Like, I feel like I have the whole rest of Canada, so I don't want to make things awkward at work. Sir, at the top.
Yeah, it's come to my attention lately, and others pointed out to me that the police generally seem to be rather opinionated about cannabis, but yet they don't come out and speak out about the dangers of alcohol, for instance, very much, which we all know is a problem. Don't you feel that there's, we often hear the police are saying, oh, I'm only doing my job. Well, you're not supposed to have an opinion, but why is it they always seem to have an opinion about marijuana, but nothing else? I'd like to, if you could ask, I'm asking this question as a police officer.
That's a good question. I wish I knew the answer.
It's a little one-sided.
I think there is some entrenched interests in terms of the official law enforcement position on drug policy, right? In Canada, but also, of course, in the United States, and abroad. And so it doesn't surprise me, for example, when a union spokesperson for a police department will stand on his soapbox and make all kinds of wild statements about marijuana, for example.
Yeah.
Do you still believe that marijuana leads to harder drugs? I know marijuana is classed as a harder drug. It's under the Narcotic Control Act, but it used to be under Food and Drug until a few years ago. Now, do you believe, as a police officer, you're trained to believe that it leads to harder drugs?
I don't know if we're trained that way necessarily, but I'll tell you that as an individual, I believe the gateway theory is a fallacy, right? And it was disproved. It was disproven a long time ago, right? And that's my. Yes, sir.
First, David, I wanted to say thanks for what you do. I really appreciate it, man. That's awesome. But I wanted to ask you about, you mentioned before that a lot of officers or people that are members of LEAP might not necessarily want to come forward. And, certain actions, like what happened recently with the limits put on speeding engagements, things like that. Is there a chill put on other police officers? Do you find that stuff coming from above? Does that stuff put a chill? Do a lot of officers not want to come forward because they're afraid of repercussions possibly at work?
I think, and I've thought about it a lot because, I'm a little disappointed that we only have, say, 100 members in our Speakers Bureau, right? I want it to be 200, 500. I want it to be 1,000 officers that are proud to speak out in favor of ending drug prohibition. So, and I think at the end of the day, there's a number of factors. The fear of being punished is one, right? There's lots of different ways to punish somebody, whether it's, subtle limitations on their career or outright punishment, or even in one case in Washington State, a police officer was fired. So there's that. There's the fact that a lot of officers just aren't interested in the topic. They may be passionate about some other area of public policy. There's the fact that some officers may have, and I don't think you're a dangerous group, but some officers might have safety concerns, for example, of coming here publicly off duty by themselves and speaking out about a controversial issue. So there's all kinds of reasons why police officers don't speak out. I think the free speech issue that you mentioned, at least in British Columbia, that will get resolved eventually. That policy complaint will be dealt with, and once it is resolved, then I guess it will be good in a way. It will set a precedent at my department, and maybe even across BC or across Canada, in the sense that there'll sort of be a line. Management will know where that line is in terms of public speaking while an officer is off duty, and the police officers will know where that line is too, right? So I'm actually optimistic in the long run. It may take some time for this policy complaint to get resolved, and I'm not really, and until it does, I'm not really speaking publicly about the incident or anything like that, but I appreciate the question. So.
Thank you very much.
Anything else? We're almost done for time.
Oh, yeah.
As just as a private citizen, what do you feel is our best thing that we can do to contribute to this?
That's a great question. How can you help? I think Michelle had some good ideas. I mean, if you're interested in changing public policy or being an activist, there's many different ways. In terms of helping law enforcement against prohibition, perhaps the best way is to go to our website, become a member. We could really use financial help right now if you want to make a donation online or something like that. 2009 was a very tough year financially for drug policy organizations, and LEAP is no exception. So we've really sort of felt the funding crunch. Any support that you can provide in that respect would certainly be appreciated. Yeah, and you know what? There have been, I have to say, there has been enormous support